What's going on, guys? This video is going to be about stick techniques versus empty hand. In this particular scenario, I will be the one with the stick and my partner James will be the one who's empty hand, and that could be anyone. We're going to look at this in a few different ways, some of it just focusing on the technique, some of it pertaining to a little bit of detaining or controlling techniques. So we're going to see how we can put that in. And so before we begin, one of the most important things that we need to outline is that we're still following many of the principles that come in Filipino martial arts that we train. Number one, being counter-offensive or just simply offensive. It's a lot easier for us to create the scenario when we are dictating the pace, the timing, the distance. All of that is in our control. Another thing we're going to be focusing on is that we are following the principle that a person who cannot see can't fight. And we're not going to use it directly in application that we're going to take away his vision, but we are going to play off of his vitals, which would be his eyes, and see how that makes him react in certain ways. Now, I'm here with my partner James, and he's going to be my opponent in this scenario, and he can be in whatever stance he so chooses. I can't control that. One of the few things that I do know at this very moment, at this particular time, James doesn't have any weapons, and I do. So I could essentially just strike away and, cause him to quit based off of pain tolerance or what have you. But ideally, what I want to try to do is use my offensive striking to set up some sort of reference point that will allow me to eventually detain him or control him without having to strike him as blunt as possible. When we do talk about striking, what we want to focus on is that we are striking the aggression, whether that be the hands that can punch, the feet that can kick, and we want to do our best to avoid striking the aggressor, which would be James at his head, in the vitals that can really cause a lot of damage. And so when I'm choosing these targets, I need to, one, be able to compress my strikes so that they're not as long and huge like a regular strike would be, but I want to compress it so I can essentially micro-target, whether it be his shoulder, his elbow, his hands, things of that nature, to eventually get him to react. One of the other ways that I can look at this is, a lot of the times you'll see that in Filipino martial arts, they'll say the hand that has the stick should match the foot that's in front, and this is what they call a fighting stance or whatever ready stance it is. And they always say, well, if you have it in the opposite, then you would cut your leg. In some cases, you can see that when it comes to edged weapons, but we want to be very literal right now, and we are in an impact weapon scenario. So having my left foot in front, the only thing that it would jeopardize is the range that my stick or my baton, whatever it might be, can reach. But in this case, I'm trying to detain, so I'm eventually going to be medium to close range as is. Now, one of the good things with this is now I have my safety hand in front. And so, remember when I spoke about a person who can't see can't fight? One of the most important things that a body will protect will be its vision, its eyes. And so I'm going to take this hand and essentially I can try to grab, and if this hand wasn't here and if it was somewhere a little lower, I can go for an eye jab, a sundot, going for the eyes, and I can really force that. And James, being trained or untrained, he's going to duck his head away, he's going to raise his hands up. He's going to react to try to protect his eyes. Otherwise, I'm going to take it with my hand. When I have that, this will be considered our reference point. And so I can use this to set up any sort of reposition and strike, right? Whether I'm micro-targeting, whatever it might be. If I want to go a little more in depth, my first technique, I can stick it in here, roll him over, and then I have him in a submissive position. Now, obviously, this isn't going to hold him forever, but it does give me a very strong reference point in order for me to start flowing and controlling whatever that might be. Okay, so playing off of the fact that he's a human being, playing off of the fact that his eyes are very important to him, I can get that reference point without me resorting to striking off of the initial blow. Now, depending on the context as well, that might be your better option, but we can't stand here and say that this is the best thing or that's the best thing. It's very, very situational specific, especially when you talk about detaining, okay? One of the final things that you can do with your stick techniques is, aside from setting up the reference point here, using our safety hand or using strikes to bring the hand to go up, I can also implement my techniques because it's impact. I can have 2 points of contact on my weapon. I'm not going to cut myself, lacerate anything, so I can really support it. And so in this specific situation, we have James covering up his face, protecting it. That could be boxer oriented. That could just be because he's taken a lot of damage, whatever that might be. But I have this so I can essentially use this to augment my thrust, my hooking section, and eventually I can use this to wrap around, crank the shoulder, and eventually turn this into some sort of lock. And so when I get into these positions, it will get a little messy and it will get a little out of place. But what I can do is I can grab it from one side to the other, one side to the other, one side to the other. And eventually I can find my way and eventually get into a submission, a detain, or maybe even a takedown depending on what position I'm in. Every time I get this lock, I'm looking for something that'll bring me into a better place. And yes, I am in close quarters, and yes, he could essentially fire back with some punches. That's where my offense will eventually come back. If I need to resort to ditching this technique and going back into my primary training, which would be striking, so be it. That is why I have the baton. Just because you have a baton or a stick doesn't mean you have to strike with it, but it also doesn't mean that you can't strike with it. And I think that's a very important thing that a lot of people should understand. When you look at any sort of detailed scenario, weapon versus no weapon, right? So if you guys enjoy this video, this will be a two-part series, very mini series, but we did stick versus empty hand. In our next video, we're gonna flip it around and we're gonna have empty hand versus stick. So if you guys enjoyed this, make sure you comment below and let us know. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out our online tutorials, FMA concepts, and until next time, catch you guys later.